The Galactic Council had in its 4,000-year history survived supernova negotiations, 3 separate attempts by the Vorrkai to declare mayonnaise a controlled substance, and 1 extremely awkward incident involving Ambassador Pleath and a malfunctioning gravity couch. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared it for the humans. My name is Graxul Tovan, Senior Diplomatic Attaché, 3rd-tier observer, and as of 6 standard rotations ago, the most involuntarily educated alien in the known galaxy on the subject of human behavioral psychology. I did not ask for this education. I did not want it. And yet here I am, writing this account from a medical bay, with 2 of my 4 hands bandaged and a cup of something called chamomile tea sitting beside me, brought by the very human who destroyed my understanding of the universe. Let me explain. The Vorrkai delegation arrived at Meridian Station 7 rotations before the humans were scheduled to appear. Meridian Station was the Council's most prestigious negotiation hub, a place where wars ended and trade agreements bloomed like fungal colonies after a good rain. The Vorrkai were there to discuss border rights over the Pelham asteroid belt, a region rich in thermal crystite ore and, more importantly, a region that sat directly between Vorrkai expansion territory and 3 independent mining colonies run by humans. Now, the Vorrkai. Let me paint you a picture of the Vorrkai. 8 limbs. Bioluminescent skin that shifts color depending on mood. Roughly the height of a transport shuttle when fully extended. Diplomatic record that includes 17 successful planetary acquisitions through what they charmingly called assertive negotiation, which the rest of the galaxy called showing up with a fleet and asking politely while pointing weapons at things. They were, in the simplest possible terms, terrifying. Their lead negotiator, Ambassador Vekka Shraal, had a reputation that made hardened council veterans reschedule dental appointments rather than sit across from her. She had once reduced a Menathi trade minister to weeping in a corridor, simply by adjusting her chromatic display to pulse at a frequency the Menathi found deeply existential. She did not negotiate, she presided. I was assigned as the council observer for the opening proceedings. My job was to sit quietly, document everything, and ensure neither party violated station protocol. Simple, clean. The kind of assignment that ends with a nice notation in your file and an unexciting dinner. Then the humans arrived. Their delegation consisted of 3 individuals. 3. The Vorrkai had brought 47. The council support staff numbered 60. The humans sent 3 people in a mid-class transport vessel that had a scratch along the port side and what appeared to be a coffee stain on the hull plating. The lead negotiator was a human named Pryor Wask, medium height, brown hair going gray at the sides. He carried a battered satchel over one shoulder, wore a jacket with a broken collar clasp, and was eating something wrapped in paper when he walked through the docking bay. He finished chewing, looked around at Meridian Station's grand welcome corridor, and said, and I am quoting directly from my audio log, "Huh, nicer than I expected. Is that real marble?" It was not marble, it was Solanthian pressure-formed mineral tile, imported at considerable expense. But the human looked genuinely delighted, so I did not correct him. His 2 companions were a tall woman named Riva Allen, who appeared to be reviewing documents on a data tablet and had not looked up once since exiting the ship, and a younger male named Teo Buruk, who was visibly nervous, visibly trying not to show it, and visibly failing at both. I introduced myself. Pryor Wask shook my primary hand with both of his, which is apparently a human gesture of warmth, and which resulted in a sensation I can only describe as being gripped by something that had absolutely no concept of its own strength. Not aggressive, not threatening, simply dense with casual force, like shaking hands with a hydraulic clamp that had decided to be friendly. Graxul, right? Great name. Strong consonants, he said. Love a good consonant. You guys have a cafeteria here? Talus didn't eat before we left. I directed them to the Delegate Lounge and tried to reset my understanding of what I was observing. The first session was scheduled for mid-rotation. The chamber was circular, as all council chambers are, with tiered seating arranged around a central discussion floor. Delegation tables were positioned facing one another with precisely calculated angles designed to project equality while subtly favoring the seated altitude of species with vertical dominance, which meant the Vorrkai table was ever so slightly elevated. Ambassador Vekka Shraal entered with her full delegation in formation. They moved like a single organism, their bioluminescent patterns synchronized in deep violet, which for the Vorrkai signaled authority, controlled aggression, and a comprehensive willingness to make your day significantly worse. The room responded. Council staff straightened. My own chromatophores, vestigial as they are, paled involuntarily. Even the air recyclers seemed to quiet down. Then Pryor Wask walked in, eating a second wrapped food item. He looked at the chamber, looked at the Vorrkai delegation, looked at the slightly elevated table that had been positioned for the council's preferred power geometry, and then walked directly to the opposite side and sat down facing the room's entrance. Not his designated position, not the table his delegation had been assigned. He simply chose a chair, set down his satchel, unwrapped his food and looked comfortable. Riva sat beside him without comment. Talus scrambled to find a chair and knocked over a water vessel, apologized to the vessel and sat down. The Vorrkai color display shifted. Confused amber streaked through the violet. Ambassador Vekka Shraal turned her primary visual cluster toward me. I had no answer for her. I had no answer for myself. I moved carefully to Pryor Wask's side and leaned close. Delegate Wask, I whispered, your designated seating is the table to your left. He looked at me, then at the table, then back at me. Yeah, I saw that, he said pleasantly. But see, that table has its back to the door. I waited. There had to be more. There was not more. I do not understand, I whispered. Old habit, he said, with the easy shrug of someone discussing a preference for weather conditions. Never sit with your back to a door. You want to see what's coming. I looked at the door. The door led to a staffed corridor. Beyond it was a catering suite. The most dangerous thing that had ever come through that door was a tureen of Vorrkai ceremonial broth that had been served at slightly the wrong temperature. Delegate Wask, I said, this is a secured diplomatic facility. Sure, he agreed, nodding genuinely. Probably fine. Still though, he took a bite of his food. Ambassador Vekka Shraal had not moved. Her delegation had not moved. 47 Vorrkai diplomats were watching a single human eat a sandwich and refused to sit where he was told because he wanted to face the door, and their collective chromatic display had gone a shade I had never personally witnessed before. It was the color I would later learn from a Vorrkai cultural reference text, that their species produces when something happens that their entire evolutionary history had not accounted for. Pryor Wask finished chewing, looked up at the silent chamber and said, should we get started? I've got notes. Ambassador Vekka Shraal had negotiated with 43 species across 6 galactic sectors. She had faced down Minathi fleet admirals, outlasted 3 separate Krenish stalling campaigns, and once sat through a Duvali morning ritual that lasted 11 consecutive rotations without breaking composure once. She was, by every measurable standard, unshakable. She stared at Pryor Wask for 14 seconds. I counted. I had nothing else to do, because the entire chamber had gone so quiet that I could hear Tio Buruk's nervous knee bouncing against the underside of his chair. Then Vekka Shraal moved. She walked, with the full ceremonial weight of Vorrkai diplomatic tradition behind every step, around the central discussion floor, past her designated table, and sat down at a position that also faced the entrance. Her delegation followed without a word. I asked, what a word? 47 Vorrkai diplomats rearranged an entire chamber configuration in complete silence because one human did not want his back to a door. Pryor Wask looked over at her, nodded with what I can only describe as collegial approval, and said, smart, you never know. Vekka Shraal's chromatic display flickered briefly. Deep violet, a flash of gold, then back to violet. In Vorrkai culture, gold means something between acknowledged, and I will be thinking about this for a long time. I have never seen a Vorrkai diplomat display gold in an opening session. Gold was not a negotiation color. Gold was a color reserved for moments of private reflection, usually after something had permanently altered one's perspective. She had been in the room for 4 minutes. I returned to my observer position and wrote, in my official documentation, the words, proceedings commenced, atmosphere unusual. Then I stared at those words for a while, decided they were profoundly insufficient, and added Delegate Wask relocated seating. Ambassador Shraal followed. Reason given. Door visibility. No further explanation provided or apparently required. The actual negotiation began shortly after. And here is where I must tell you something about Pryor Wask that I did not understand until much later, when I had the benefit of distance and chamomile tea and bandaged hands. He was not performing. He was not running a strategy. Every tactic I initially assumed was calculated pressure. Every pause, every casual comment, every infuriating moment of relaxed disinterest was entirely genuine. The man simply was exactly what he appeared to be, and in a chamber full of species who had spent centuries learning to read deception, manufacturing psychological angles, and treating every micro-expression as a weapon, A person who was simply and completely themselves was the most disorienting thing any of us had ever encountered. The Vorrkai opened with their standard position, a territorial claim supported by 17 legal precedents, 4 historical usage arguments, and 1 extremely thorough geological survey that demonstrated the Pelham asteroid belt had formed in a region that 3,000 years ago had been adjacent to Vorrkai space. It was by any objective measure, an overwhelming opening argument, the kind that fills a room with inevitability, where the other side is not so much defeated as gently informed that defeat had already occurred and everyone was simply waiting on the paperwork. Pryor Wask listened. He made notes. He nodded occasionally. When the presentation concluded, he was quiet for a moment, looked down at his battered satchel, pulled out a single folded piece of actual physical paper, unfolded it, smoothed it on the table with his palm and said, "Okay, so, the miners." Vekka Shraal waited. 3 colonies, Pryor Wask continued, roughly 12,000 people, been out there 19 years, families, kids born on those rocks who've never been planetside. The Pelham Belt is not their home because it's convenient. It's their home because they built it from nothing and they don't have anywhere else to go. He folded the paper back up, put it in his pocket, set his hands flat on the table. "I'm not saying your legal argument is wrong," he said. "It's thorough. I respect thorough. But I want to make sure we're all clear on what the word territorial acquisition means in practical terms for those 12,000 people. Before we spend the next 6 sessions discussing it in legal language that makes it sound like moving furniture." Silence. Not the silence of a room waiting for a response. The silence of a room that had just realized the conversation had shifted underneath it without anyone seeing the move. Riva Aln, who had not spoken once since arriving, turned a page on her data tablet. Vekka Shraal's chromatic display pulsed slowly, calculating. She had argued against moral framing before. She had protocols for it. The counter was to redirect to legal standing and let the weight of precedent reassert itself as the primary axis of discussion. She opened her mouth to deploy exactly that counter. Pryor Wask said, "Also, and I mean this respectfully, your geological survey dates the belt formation to the Tercine period, but the independent survey our people filed with the council 7 years ago puts it at late Meridian, which changes the adjacency argument by about 40 light minutes. I have the filing number if that helps." He said it the way someone mentions they noticed a smudge on a window. Helpful. Mild. Completely devastating. Vekka Shraal closed her mouth, turned to her legal attaché. The attaché checked something urgently, turned back, displayed a color I did not need a reference text to interpret. It was the universal chromatic equivalent of "we are going to need a moment." What followed was not what any of us had anticipated. The Vorrkai requested a recess. They got one. Pryor Wask used the break to find the cafeteria, bring back 3 beverages in insulated containers, and offer one to me. I accepted because I did not know how to decline without seeming rude. It tasted like something had given up halfway through becoming tea. "You doing okay?" he asked, sitting beside me in the corridor with the relaxed posture of a man watching a pleasant sunset rather than a man who had just destabilized a Vorrkai legal position that 47 specialists had spent 8 months constructing. "I am processing a great deal," I told him honestly. He nodded. "Negotiations are weird," he said. "Everyone comes in with their whole architecture of arguments, right? All these structures they've built, and then someone just asks a plain question and the whole thing has to get rebuilt from a different angle." He shrugged. "I've found it's better to just say the plain thing early. Saves time. Ambassador Shraal is considered one of the most formidable negotiators in the known sectors," I said. "Yeah, I can tell," he said, with what sounded like genuine admiration. "She moved the whole delegation because of where I sat. Fast read, good instincts." I stared at him. "She moved because you created a psychological displacement scenario that forced a positional response." He looked at me blankly. "I moved because I didn't want my back to the door." "Yes," I said. "Right," he said. My voice badayul, niabidora decode. Decoded message brapyul, 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 decoded message brapyul. We sat with that for a moment. The sessions continued for 3 more rotations. I will not detail every exchange, because this account would fill a transport manifest, and my hands are only now recovering. What I will tell you is that the agreement reached on the Pelham Belt was, according to 3 separate council analysts, the most equitable resource-sharing framework negotiated in the past 200 years. The mining colonies kept their homes, the Vorrkai received confirmed extraction rights to the outer belt sections, and a formal council acknowledgement of their historical adjacency claim, which cost nothing material but satisfied something deep in their diplomatic tradition that nobody had thought to address before. Vekka Shraal, on the final morning, walked to Pryor Wask's table before the closing session. Her display was a color I later identified as reserved, in Vorrkai culture, for moments of genuine and somewhat reluctant respect. She said, in translated standard, "You sat facing the door because you wanted to see what was coming." "Habit," he confirmed. "In 40 years of negotiation," she said, "no one has ever made me move first." Pryor Wask looked at her with what I had come to recognize as his default expression. Open, genuine, slightly amused. "Well," he said, "now you know to sit where you can see the door." She was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, for the first and only time in recorded council proceedings, Ambassador Vekka Shraal of the Vorrkai displayed a color that the reference text described as laughter. Not gold, not violet, something between the two, warm at the edges, that her species produces when something is, against all expectation, actually funny. I documented it. I documented all of it, because that is my job. And because someone has to warn the rest of the galaxy. The humans are coming. They are going to sit facing the door. They are going to eat sandwiches during recesses. They are going to say the plain thing at exactly the moment you have prepared for everything except the plain thing. And you are not going to be ready. None of us were.